have been working today, finishing up this wall hanging for the shop. It's called Haunted Night by Danielle Leon from Wilmington Prince. It's super fun to do. A great project, not too huge for a holiday that's, you know, just a one day. But then I was looking at it, and as I was cutting my borders, I thought, wait, hold the bus here. So many people would shy away from this because with using a border print, you want to do a mitered border so that all our borders line up so it looks like we pieced them absolutely perfectly. A lot of people will shy away from this because it's too hard. They've tried it before, their borders were wavy, their points were all pointy and crooked, and it didn't lie at that nice 45. So I thought with a few suggestions, some tips from me, maybe that it's not so daunting and you'll give it a try. It's not a reason to stop quilting. So I'm down to cutting my last border. And this is what we wanted to do. I looked in the pattern and it says that we're supposed to be cutting at 8 3/4 inches. So I made sure that I lined my fabric up exactly the way the pattern was. And I seen that they cut, so none of the orange on top of the cats show, none of the orange on the bottom of the haunted house panel shows. So that's going to give me a tip of where I want to cut. So if I align my ruler totally in the center here, I can see that my 1/4 inch is going to be cutting on the right side of the black. So if I don't sew quite perfectly, I'm going to end up with a little bit of black in the seam, little bit of black that shows. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to move my ruler, and I'm going to put, so my 1/4 inch mark on my ruler is just to the inside of the black, so it's on the white part or the cream part of the quilt. And then I'm going to look at my other side. So my 8 3/4 is on the orange strip, but my 8 1/2, that 1/4 inch mark where my seam's going to be, is well into the black. So I'm happy with that. I'm not going to be losing anything because it's just like the bottom of the ground. So I like that cut, and that's the way I'm going to cut all of my pieces. So again, I've lined it up with a 1/4 inch. I'm going to cut. You can cut to the edge of your ruler, and if you want, you can move your fabric like this. Again, keep it nice and straight on your board. Grab our ruler, lining up this 1/4 inch mark here. Not worrying about what's going on over there. This is the cut that I'm worried about right now. So I can cut. Now, when I want to move my ruler, if I want to slide it up just a little bit, if I hold my rotary cutter nice and tight, my ruler butts into the blade and it won't move. I know that that's exactly that 1/4 inch that I want. So I can just move it up, adjust my ruler, and I can just take another little bit of a cut before I have to move my fabric. Again, my 1/4 inch. I can always scratch it with my fingernail and pull the fabric to where I need it to be. That's the best thing about fabric. It does have a little bit of give. And one last cut here. Again, my 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch up. Hold my rotary cutter. I can slide my ruler up that rest of the bit and cut that piece off. So this piece, I just might make a couple masks or something with, or maybe some placemats or some pot holders. We'll put that in our bonus fabric. So now what I'm going to do again is I'm going to turn my strip around and cut the other side. I'm sure that you've all tried to work with panels and borders and they were really wonky. Well, they're not printed that way. When the companies print them, they're always printed nice and straight. It's when they're folded and put on the bolts is when they start going all stretched and wonky. So if I know that this line is really nice and perfect, I know that I'm going to put my 8 3/4 inch line right on the edge of my fabric like I normally do when I'm cutting, and I'm going to cut this side off. And again, holding my ruler, I can slide it up just little bits, cutting like that. You can see that this panel doesn't have a lot of waste. I mean, this border, it doesn't have a lot of waste. So that's kind of nice. Some panels, or some patterns, excuse me, some patterns will use only just part of the strip, and then you would have some for others. But this one uses almost all of it, so I kind of like that. The last of my borders, and I'll be ready to put them on my quilt. Alrighty, so we've got our 4 borders cut to the exact size that we needed, and now we're ready to put them on the quilt. If you see the pattern, this is the traditional way of putting a border, a mitered border on a quilt. So you can see that they sew it on, they fold the quilt in half, they draw a line, sew on the line. There's too many things that can go wrong that way, and we do it a little bit differently now. We have learned that if I just take a border and sew it on my quilt, it's not going to lay flat. It's going to go wobbly. So we want to make sure that we cut our borders to the size that it needs to be. You can see there's 2 different borders for this quilt. One of them has a haunted house in the center, and one of them has the faces. So we're going to put the haunted house on 2 sides and then the faces on the other side. So let's start with that. You can see my quilt. I have marked it with tape, top, left, right, bottom, because I want to make sure that my border stays on the side that it's supposed to be. Normally with a quilt you may be able to, if it's a panel or something, you'll be able to see what the top and the bottom is, but with this quilt it can be turned in any directions, but I still want to mark them and put them on the right sides. So I'm going to find the center of my block, I'm going to find the center of my border. There's abouts, and I am going to place it in the center of my quilt. I'm using one of my sashing so I can keep my strip nice and straight. We're going to be cutting the diagonal here, so you know your border has to be as sticking out at least as wide as what your strip is. Once I have this in place, and especially if it's a larger quilt, I'm going to put a couple pins in there so I can move it back and forth, shift it, and it's not going to go, your border's not going to move. Alrighty, so let's work on this side right here. So I have to think, so I am cutting the bottom border. So I am going to take my label that says bottom, and I'm going to put it on that border just to keep it straight in my head which direction my miter is going to go. I love these creative grids because they have 2 45s, and they are what we're going to have to cut this angle at. So I'm thinking this is my bottom, it's going to be here, so I want to start from my corner and go out at a 45 in that direction. So I will find the 45-degree line on my ruler. I will place it on the edge of my strip, right so it intersects where that seam is right there. it's not going to be quite long enough, so I have to use the other. So you can see that this one didn't quite work. My ruler's not to the edge of my fabric, and if my ruler will go actually right off my mat, so I'm just going to adjust my mat a little bit. I'm going to use my other 45. So there's two 45s that you can use, either the one along the edge of your quilt or the one along the strip. It depends on which corner you're doing, which miter that you would use, which 45-degree line you would use. So I've got this 45-degree line going down the side of my quilt, so I can get this angle here. Again, remember, from the quilt out. And I am going to cut that. And I just want to be really careful here on this end not to cut my quilt. Like that. I am going to shift my quilt so I can cut this other side. Now this time I'm going to use the other diagonal. Let's just make sure that this is all nice and straight. This time I'm going to use the 45 that's on the top of the quilt. You can see this 45 will automatically run down this side. I want to cut from the corner right into the intersection, out at the perfect at the perfect 45-degree. We're going to cut all 4 borders at the same time. So I've done this one. I'm going to unpick it. I'm going to unpin it and put it to the side. And now I'm going to do my top border. You can see that I want the cats to be against the quilt. So at this time, being the top, it is going to be actually upside down from what I'm working at. I will take the salvage. I'm going to put that house in the center. I'm going to take, I'm sorry, not my salvage, I'm going to take my sashing strip and use that as my line to line my border up. And let's just secure it with a few pins again. Now, this one is going to be for the top. That means it's going to be here. Our angle is going to go in this direction. Let's find the 45 that we need. You can see there's a 45 right there. I align it on the front, or sorry, I align it on the edge of my strip until it becomes exactly in that corner where my border and my quilt meet. And I am going to cut that. It's off just a smidge. Maybe we can make masks or something with those. I'm going to move it and cut this second side. Again, remembering, thinking, we're going from the quilt out that way. I did cut that correctly. Let's find our 45 that works. Top of our strip. So our ruler lines up to the edge. careful you don't cut your quilt. And off. Unpin it. I forgot to mark this one. We want to make sure that we mark that one top. Two more to go. I can turn my quilt, and that's why I put labels on it. I work better in this direction, but I want to make sure that I have them, my border on the right side, on the proper side. Now we're ready to sew them onto our quilt. So I'll start with this one. When we're sewing a miter, we are going to do what they call a Y seam. So it's going to be a 3-step process, and we do not want to sew into the seam allowance. So there's a little bit of marking that we're going to have to do. We want to know exactly where our seam allowance is going to intersect in the corner because we don't want to sew past that. So what I want to do is I want to mark that intersection of my two seams. This time I'm going to put my ruler so my 1/4 inch line is beside my fabric. I want to make sure I make up for the width of my lead. So I'm going to draw a line there. I'm going to draw a line there. I am going to do the identical thing on all 4 corners, as well as the corner of our borders. I've got a friction marker here, so you can see this one. Again, my seam line, my 1/4 inch line on the outside of my fabric. I'm going to draw. And I'm going to draw. Let's do that on all our corners. So now that we have all our corners marked, we are going to find the center and we're going to pin it to our quilt the way we normally pin a border, by finding our centers and our sides. Quarters, if it was a large one, this one it's small, so I'm not going to worry about the quarters, but I definitely need to find my center and my sides. So we've got our sides marked. I am going to find the center of my strip, mark it with a pin. This is the right one, so we're going to go to our right side. Find the center, mark it with a pin. So again, remember that the cats are going against the quilt. I'm just going to match my center pins, align my edges perfectly, and pin it. Now on the corner, we have our 2 X's, and that's the part that we're going to line up. So I'm going to put a pin in the center of this X, a pin in the center of that X, and align them up so they're nice and straight. So you can see my pin is not crooked. We want to make sure that our pin is lined up and stands nice and straight. When it does, we can grab another pin and we can pin it like that. We'll go to the other corner. again, center of this X, center of that X, jiggle and wiggle, aligning the edge of our strip, and shifting it until our pin stands nice and straight. You can see, I don't know if you can see if you can get close enough, but the corners don't actually meet, but that's okay. It's the center of that X that's the important part. Zoom back. And now we're just going to put a few more pins in here just to hold it together from shifting. And then this side. And you can meet me at the sewing machine. Okay. So we want to sew from the center of this X all the way down to the center of the other X. We do not want to sew past, but we do want to lock our stitches so they don't pull. So if I just started sewing there without locking our stitches, it would pull open and then you would have a hard time putting the other border on. You can use your lock stitch, but that goes backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards. So sometimes it goes too far into the ditch. You could just use your reverse up to the center, but again, some of the times when you turn your machine on reverse, it'll take another stitch in the direction, and usually it's the direction you don't want it to be. So this method works the best and it's the most accurate. I'm going to take my bobbin thread and my taut thread and leave them long, and I am going to take my needle and I am going to put my foot, I'll put my foot up so you can see. Can you zoom in underneath there? So I want to start sewing exactly in the center of that spot. So I am going to sew. Making sure my borders are and I'm going to sew all the way to the other side. So we're coming up to the X. Now I want to make sure that my last stitch is exactly in the center of our X. If I have to, I will manually turn the needle into that spot. It's going to go past, so all I'm going to do is just to adjust this, I'm going to lift my foot. I'm going to make sure that that needle goes, whoops, right into that X. Put my foot down again for the tension, all the way down, all the way back up. Lift my foot. I'm going to pull it away, and I want long strings on this side as well. So it doesn't matter what side I pull my threads to, but I want to pull my both threads to the one side. If I pull on the top one here, I can see the loop of my bobbin thread, and I'm just going to grab it and pull it, and I'm going to knot this by hand nice and snugly. I can cut my threads off a little short now, and you can see that it's going to be nice and tight and it's not going to open up. I'm also going to do it to the other end. Again, pull my thread. Grab my loop. If you can master your reverse stitch and do this that way, that's fine. But it's always done weird things for me. So now that I have this done, I'm going to press it out, but I'm not going to press this part of the corner. So I can press this seam out, but not here. Leave that loose. I am going to go and get my top border to sew on this side. So now I'm pinning on my top border. Again, I matched my center and I matched my X on this side. Now I am going to go to this side. So I have my X here where I can place my pin. And you can see here, if I pull this back, you can see the one bar of the X, my other X, and the stitch. I want to make sure that I'm in the very last stitch. I don't want to pin on top of this border whatsoever. So I'm going to align that up, aligning my pin, pinning that. And like any other border, if there's any fullness, we do want to distribute it in between the pins. Put a couple pins and back to the sewing machine. Okay, don't forget to leave your 2 long tails. We're going to start with that pin right in, or I'm sorry, we'll start with the needle right in the center of our X. Foot down. And let's stitch down to the other X. Okay. So I want to make sure I know where that seam is, because remember, I do not want to sew on this border at all. So I'm just going to slowly go up there. One more stitch. One more stitch. Maybe just a half a stitch. Let's just back up a little bit. One up. Again, long tails. And pull them through. Okay. So now here's where the magic of this part, this technique sets in. If you've ever tried to do the miter and then you were trying to fold your quilt in half and you've got this really big quilt that's all bulky, trying to fold it to get that perfect 45, you know how difficult it is. But we don't have to worry about that. All right, so what I'm going to do, so there's my 2 corners that are already cut at that perfect 45. I'm just going to take my quilt. I am going to align these 2 borders up like that. So I'm just going to put a pin here. You can see that I've pressed both seam allowances in that direction. And when you're doing a border print, normally there's some stripes or something that have to match. I really don't care what happens in here. It's the strips that really have to match. So I will make sure that my stripe is aligned up perfectly on this side. Perfectly on that side. I have another stripe on this side. We're going to align that up perfectly. Now this is a bias seam, so it has a lot of stretch. So don't be afraid to put in a few more pins and sew very slowly, carefully, so we don't stretch that. And I'm going to put another one here. I'm just going to take my quilt I want to make sure that it's out of the way, that I don't sew it in. I'm just going to pull it out. And again, that same beginning knotting in the X, I'm going to pull my long threads. I am going to put, I can take this pin out because it's sewn. I am going to start this sewing right at that stitch, right there. Again, by hand, wheeling it down so that it's in the exact right spot. Put our foot down, and off we go. Okay, make sure you don't stretch. Again, right at the end, you notice that I kept my hand beside a corner. I'll just cut this. The corner has a tendency to want to shift. I want to make sure that it stays exactly where it is so it goes right out. And now we're going to go press it. Okay, so don't forget to knot your threads again the same ways we did with the other seams, so it doesn't come undone. And let's press. So we're going to press from the back. So what we're going to do is press our border seams up. I just give it a little tug, not really hard, but I just want to make sure that I don't get any of the little fold overs. And then this seam here, I want to press it open. I'll just arrange the corner like that and press open. And there you have it. I'll show you. We have the corner that's absolutely perfect. We haven't had to sew it twice. All our stripes are all lined up. Looks like we pieced all this perfectly. It's not making a really funky shape, lying nice and flat. So let's just go put the other two borders on and I'll show you the finished project. And there we have it, the finished product. So you can see I've sewn on all four borders. I've sewn the corners only once, not like 2 or 3 times like in the old method. And everything's laying flat, ready to go on the long arm and be ready for Halloween. I do have some kits available if you like this project. If not, I hope you try mitered borders at home. It's not as hard as you think. Thanks for watching. Bye now.